Is the United States world order led by the United States in decline versus China? Let's talk about it on Azimuth Podcast. I'm Barrett McNabb, and with me is Kimberly McNabb.
Well, we have death to America being shouted on college campuses. It's not surprising when students are taught to not be proud to be America. America is the best? Oh, but no, that's nationalism. You know, the decline of America's image on the world stage sadly lives across the pond too, and it's not just in the Middle East. Our ally, Hungary, is taking foreign policy advice not from us, but from China. Hungary says it wants peace in Ukraine, and so it also supports the Chinese peace initiative presented by Xi Jinping.
Yeah, so this is really interesting because you have China's peace deal that they've put on the table, and it's really problematic because you have China that's dealing with not only a NATO ally, which Hungary is, but also a European Union member, and so it has a lot of weight when it says what it wants to do in support of a peace deal. Now, again, we all know a peace deal is that Putin is going to get to keep everything it already has. Right? It's not like the borders are going to go back and they get Crimea. It's going to be Russia either gets to keep what it has, and Russia currently is in the midst of an offensive, so they're going to grab more territory. So I can imagine it's whatever they get is where the boundaries are going to be. It's not going to be, hey, let's go back 6 months ago, let's go back a year ago. No, Russia's going to keep going on until to see how much they can get. But so the peace plan that China is trying to broker is not going to be advantageous to Ukraine whatsoever. But the biggest thing is, as China is going through the European Union, he just had a meeting last week with Macron in France. He's currently having meetings with Vladimir Putin right now in Russia in China, and so it's there's this grand changing, or what China wants to do with the long game is to remove the United States and its protection of the current world order in order to have China be sitting at that position. But the two nations agreed to 17 deals that loop Hungary into China's ongoing Belt and Road Initiative, and it's really, again, it's problematic because if you look at the Norwegian Institute for Defense Studies criticizing this, China's peace plan is having definitely, again, ulterior motives, and the 12 points that are outlined on this thing are clearly, really, again, too abstract to be a roadmap to end the war, and the Chinese initiative really should be looked at with some suspicion as the Chinese are trying to do this diplomatic rivalry with the United States.
Yeah, anytime something feels good, but the game plan's a little abstract, yeah, you should be suspicious.
Absolutely.
And I feel that way about a lot of politicians in general. They say a lot of things that sound good, but they have no real game plan to achieve the so-called goal. Well, a leading national security expert, Dmitry Alperovitch,
I wouldn't be able to pronounce his name either.
yes, who predicted Putin's intention to invade Ukraine, argues that China's Xi Jinping is preparing to conquer Taiwan in the upcoming years. Hungary endorses China's cure for Ukraine. Is it a warning?
Yeah, this is proof that China is a threat with their Belt and Road Initiative. I mean, I have no doubt that China is going to take back Taiwan, and I'm going to put a time frame on it, in less than 10 years. Less than 10 years.
Sounds reasonable.
They've been doing massive preparations. When Nancy Pelosi visited, they did an entire blockade, practice doing a blockade. It's going to happen in 10 years, and I can promise you China is looking closely at what the world does to Ukraine.
Yes.
Or how the world perceives Russia's involvement in Ukraine, because as that elephant gets eaten one bite at a time, you're going to eventually eat the whole elephant, and so it's important to recognize that this is what's going to happen. But there's this U.S. pivot towards Asia. I mean, it's taken a long time for the United States to pivot towards Asia, mainly because of the global war on terror, right? Mm-hmm. We were a little distracted, and we were mainly focused as a fighting force to focus on counterinsurgency operations, COIN. And now we need to do the big maneuver warfare, division on division, conventional fight. Now, I always disagreed with General David Petraeus. He always touted that COIN, counterinsurgency, was the PhD level warfare, and in my opinion, I always thought that the huge brigade maneuver force and division maneuver force was always more important, because if you make a mistake in counterinsurgency, you could lose a platoon. You make a mistake in high intensity conflict with maneuver brigades and maneuver divisions, you lose a brigade. Right. And so now that we're starting to pivot and pay attention to China, I think that's a good thing. But again, China's developing new trade linkages and cultural export markets to boost Chinese incomes. And really, not only exporting China's productive capacity, but they're also exporting, Marxism and communism and other political things as well.
Yep. Since COVID's and the Russian invasion of Ukraine's effects on the world markets, an increasing number of low GDP Brick Road Initiative countries have struggled to repay the loans with the Brick Road Initiative, leading to debt crisis all over the place.
Yeah, that Belt Road Initiative is really, it's a problem. India has tried to convince countries that the Belt Road is just a way for China to dominate Asia and Africa as well. There's huge things going on in Africa that China is doing, and it's a warning that some analysts are calling this string of pearls. Mm-hmm. Right. And so it's a geoeconomic strategy where China is creating unsustainable debt burdens for these Indian Ocean and Pacific Ocean neighbors in order to seize control of regional choke points. Now, when you look at that, China does not have a lot of arable land, and arable land meaning farmland. It's very mountainous, especially in the West, and so there's not these huge flat pieces of terrain like you have in Texas and Oklahoma and Nebraska and Ohio and things like that, in Indiana, where you're growing corn, you're growing wheat, you're doing this huge agriculture industry. So China has to do that somewhere else. And mainly over the past couple of decades, they've been choosing Africa to get a lot of farmland, and so they're paying countries in order to utilize their land and then export the food back to China. So it's not that the land is being utilized and then the host country gets to reap the agricultural benefit. All of it's being exported, and there are a lot of countries that are doing this. But some of the big things that China is doing is loaning countries money in order to do huge infrastructure projects, right? Whether it's to build a port, whether it's to build an airport or a seaport, whether it's to build bridges, factories, and things like that. So China will loan these countries money, and then in order to get these long-term leases, then the Chinese in that deal will have a stipulation that Chinese companies have to be the constructors, the people doing the contracting and doing the construction, and so the money's being loaned to the countries. The countries then are giving the money back to Chinese companies in order to do the labor, and at these high interest rates. And so the problem is these countries, the debt burden is huge. It's huge, and they
don't have enough GDP to pay for it.
Exactly, and so then China gets to default and take over the seaports and things like that. Now, China has said that they have no interest in any overseas military bases, and they're liars. I mean, they're just They're liars.
Why wouldn't they?
Yeah, I mean, they're liars. And so there's a great case in point in Djibouti. There's a U.S. task force there that's in Djibouti that is on the Horn of Africa. And they're conducting operations in Yemen, a lot of drone stuff, a lot of anti-piracy operations. Well, the Chinese have built a port in Djibouti that can service some of their new blue water Navy ships. And if you're not aware, China has just put its third aircraft carrier into sea trials. And it's really going to help them get into that blue water Navy. Now, dirty water, brown water Navy, those are ships that can stay near the coast of a country. But blue water navies, they can go across the Pacific and actually project power. And so with China meeting with various countries and constructing ports, they're on one hand, they're saying, well, these ports aren't for us to have military installations, but on the other hand, they're mimicking the exact design of the port in Djibouti that it does support blue water Navy. So as they're lying and building these locations around, they're really wanting to change and pivot the Asia Pacific area towards China. I mean, it's clear as day. So one of the things that was interesting, and it didn't get a lot of coverage, but a number of months ago, China helped broker a normalization deal with Iran and Saudi Arabia. And the interesting thing was that the documents to kind of canonize this agreement and this normalization of governments. So, obviously there were agreements that were in Farsi. There were agreements that were in Arabic, but then, interestingly, the final agreement was in Mandarin Chinese. And the interesting thing, or the disconcerting thing about that, is normally the diplomatic agreements are in English. And then before World War II, diplomatic agreements were in French, was the standard, and before that, Latin. But still, to have China brokering and flexing their diplomatic muscles, and then making sure that agreements are in Mandarin Chinese, it's a slow process. It's a slow process, but it's slowly showing that that the United States diplomatic efforts that we have been responsible for, or not necessarily responsible for, but that we have done over the past 50, 75 years since World War II, all the money that we've spent in building up these economies and helping Africa and things like that, it's basically, what have you done for me lately?
Right. Yeah. People always want more.
Yeah. So I mean, it's as if that we have not done anything. Yeah, we had some advantages over the past 50 years, but they're like, look, yeah, you gave us that money a long time ago, and now China's giving us money now. And so we're going to answer to China now. I mean, one of the things that I noticed in Afghanistan was when I was deployed there is driving through mountainous terrain and seeing the mountains bleed rust. I mean, bleeding rust. So obviously there is lots of iron ore in the mountains, and I always thought that if the Afghan government was going to do anything, they would want to sell mineral rights and really exploit those minerals. They have a ton of minerals, and so anyway, what happened is China made a deal with the Afghan government and got mineral rights for 100 years, right? 100 years. Now, when the U.S. pulled out of Afghanistan and the Taliban took over the country again, man, China, quick, fast, and in a hurry, sent diplomatic envoys to the Taliban to kind of reinforce, hey, we have these mineral rights that you guys have done. And so those are in place. Those are in place. I don't know what China did to, gave the Taliban, but those are in place still. And so China immediately went to secure their claims there and their agreements that they had there in Afghanistan. So, they're just doing so many things that have future capabilities, and the United States, I don't know. I mean, have we done our shot? Have we spent all the money that we can? Because right now we're borrowing money to give to other countries, and so I just see that as problematic, and I don't think we're going to be able to do the same level of giving countries stuff that China is doing in their Belt Road Initiative.
Yeah, and so I see that we're losing our soft power,
right? And
then it'll be China whispering in other countries' ears.
Yeah, I mean, when you go back, and there's this famous analysis that was done that now this has changed, but still the famous analysis that no two countries that had a McDonald's ever went to war with each other. And so it was, again, just exporting soft power, exporting Coca-Cola, exporting Levi jeans, exporting democracy, across the world. And it's just been to that point where I think we've done all we can, as far as being able to judiciously spend the money that we have, that we're borrowing from other people in order to give to other countries. But it's going to be interesting to see what happens. Now, again, there have been countries that have had McDonald's and gone to war. Georgia and Russia in 2008. Clearly, Ukraine and Russia, recently. So that doesn't hold true anymore. But still, it was interesting to look at, and so we wanted to talk to you about this. Again, we haven't seen a lot of podcast episodes talking about this, but we wanted to bring this to your attention. So thank you so much for tuning into Azimuth Podcast. Please stay tuned after these messages.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for listening. If you enjoy our show with all the stories we share, we would love your support.
And it's as easy as clicking that subscribe or follow button. This will ensure you never miss an episode and keeps us bringing you these important stories. Your support makes a huge difference. Thank you so much for being part of our podcast family.
Thanks, and keep tuning in.